Hi everyone, it's Amber with Spirit&Soul Handcrafted Gifts, and today I am making a Georgia Peach serving tray and matching coaster set. I'm going to start off by mixing 16 ounces of resin for about 5 minutes or until it's streak free. I'm just using clear resin at this point. It's going to work not only as the base coat for my serving trays and coaster set, but also as the top coat, because if you've been tuning in to my previous videos, you know with my printouts, I print them flipped horizontally, so that way once I paint the words or the picture or anything in my serving tray, once I flip it, it will be the correct way. So I just wanted to get an idea of what things would look like once I'm ready to decorate. Now that my resin is all mixed up, I wanted to take my heat gun to start heating things up and start popping those bubbles that you see in the cup. While giving my resin a little bit of time to settle, I take my tape and go around the inside of my serving tray mold and coaster molds just to get that dust and debris out before I start pouring my clear resin. Before pouring my resin, I take all of my printouts and remove them from underneath my molds, just so when I'm pouring my resin, I am pouring on as flat a surface as possible. Take my heat gun and give it another zap just to pop those surface bubbles, and just to pop as many bubbles as possible before I start pouring my resin into my molds. Now that I'm ready to pour my resin, I pour it into the center of each mold. After I'm done pouring all of my resin into my molds, I'll say about 1 ounce of resin per coaster, and then that leaves 12 ounces of resin to pour into your serving tray mold. I take my heat gun and I just go around and make sure that the resin is touching all sides of the mold, and also I am popping any bubbles that rise to the surface. After using my heat gun, I noticed some little fibers that ended up at the surface of my resin. So I take one of my dual-sided tools from Hobby Lobby. I take the metal tip point and I'm just dipping it into my resin where I see those little fibers and pick them out of there. I wipe it off on my wipe and I repeat those steps until I get all the fibers out. Just gonna pick these last fibers out of my resin and let it harden a bit overnight. Now that my resin has hardened a bit overnight, it's not fully hardened. It does still have a good bit of flexibility to it. I am ready to start my next step. I'm taking ZenQ's crushed glass in black. Look at it sparkle. It's got a little sparkle there. And I am going to start spelling out the word Georgia. with my crushed glass. This step did take a great deal of time. It took me about an hour and a half to do it. So no worries, I'm gonna speed it up for you guys. And yeah, let's get started with step 2. I started out with a silicone mixing stick to kind of maneuver the glass around where I needed it to go, but as I was using it, I realized it was a little too big, especially when it came to maneuvering the glass like around those corners and edges. So I did switch to my dual-tipped crafting tool that I got from Hobby Lobby, and that definitely helped move the glass around a lot better. As I mentioned, it took me an hour and a half to do this step, just creating the word Georgia with my black crushed glass. You want to take your time doing this. The glass does shift and move around a bit. I chose not to cover it in resin first just because I knew this step was going to take a good amount of time and I didn't want my resin hardening on me as I was trying to complete this step. I will say, even though it took a good amount of time to complete, as you go along, it does get a little bit easier. You can kind of eyeball what pieces of glass will work where you're trying to put it. And yeah, so we'll just keep chugging along until we've got the word Georgia. Alright, finally done. I'm going to clean up this extra crushed glass, and now I am ready to give it a few spritz of crystal clear enamel by Rust-Oleum. That way when I pour my clear resin, it doesn't go moving around and shifting on me. It kind of helps to make it stay in place. You want to be mindful of your spraying and make sure to spray from pretty high. That way you're not moving your crushed glass around. As you can see, one of the pieces of crushed glass kind of got blasted out of its position, and the enamel is a bit sticky, so you also need to be careful when putting any pieces that may be moved back. So yeah, I'm gonna get that piece back in there, give it another couple of sprays, and get ready for my next step. I let that dry for a couple of hours, and now I'm ready to come in with ZenQ's orange red crushed glass as well as their green crushed glass to do my peach. Here we go. Those kind of glisten as well. So I'm going to start with my orange red and just dump it in the middle of the peach and start spreading it out until it makes the shape. Now that I've positioned my orange, red, and green crushed glass where I want it, I do the same thing I did when I made the word Georgia. I come through with my Rust-Oleum clear enamel and I give it a few spritz just so I can make sure that my crushed glass isn't shifting around when I'm ready to come pour over it with my clear resin. Alright, time for the coasters. I'm using Artisan's dual tip acrylic paint markers. I'm gonna start off with the black marker because I am writing the word, well, I guess painting the word Georgia in my coaster. If you take a look at my tray, you can see that I've already poured over it with clear resin, so I can let those pieces of crushed glass set in there before I get ready to pour my colored resin after I'm done painting my coasters. Alright, both Georgia coasters are done. Now I'm ready to get started with my Georgia peach ones. Gonna make sure that my printout is centered in my mold or positioned where you want it. If you don't want it centered, you don't have to center it. I prefer mine centered. And this time I'm going to be using Artisan's orange and green acrylic paint markers this time. Alright, so let's do these peaches. Alright, my coasters are all done for now. I'm going to go over them with another coat of paint once this coat dries and get ready to pour my color pigmented resin once everything's all dry. Okay, everything's all dry. I've mixed up 14 ounces of resin for this step. I'm going to mix in Apple Barrel's Parrot Blue acrylic paint for the background color. So I'm going to squirt some of that into my clear resin and give it a good mix. As I'm mixing, the parrot blue is a little bit darker than I was anticipating, so I take some Apple Barrel's acrylic white paint and mix that in also. You want to make sure to mix your paint into your resin really well. That way you don't have any streaks in your resin. Now that I made sure that my paint is all mixed into my resin, I pour my colored resin into the middle of each mold and make sure that the mold is filled completely, touching all of the sides. Make sure to pour your resin on top of those raised pieces of crushed glass, just so they're covered and your resin can also self-level. Now that my colored resin is poured into all of my molds, I take my heat gun and go around just to pop those bubbles and to make sure that my resin is touching all the sides, covering everything in the middle, and just to heat things up a bit to start the process of its setting. use my heat gun to start popping those bubbles. I'm going to use my double-sided crafting tool from Hobby Lobby to start picking out any fibers I see. Now that I've let everything harden overnight, it's time to demold. I was a little nervous about the light blue, but I really like the way that it turned out. See my serving tray and coaster sliding right out of the mold. No sticking, no issue, no problem. Alright, so let's get into this fiasco here. So as you can see, I've got my serving tray sitting on some wax paper, which is sitting on top of my silicone mats. And what you're going to see me do is pour my clear resin directly in the middle of my serving tray so I can start doing a top coat so I can place my handles. Now, what you do not want to do is what I am doing right now. You want to prop up your serving tray on top of like another silicone mold or some paper cups or something, so where once that resin starts spilling over the sides of the mold, it's not going to stick to the wax paper or anything. You don't have to worry about it sticking to anything. I did not do that, and what happened was you can see the resin spilling over the sides right now, which is what I wanted it to do, but you can see I used way too much resin, and also after it started to set and harden, it just stuck together, and all of that overflow was like a big puddle. I had to use scissors to cut it off. I had to use my X-Acto knife to get all those jagged edges and things. So it was just a big mess and a lot of extra work. So don't do this. You can just see my anxiety starting to kick in as I'm looking at this, but all in all, I made it through. Now you know what not to do, and it ended up working out. And these are the finished products. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful, please like and subscribe. YouTubers, take 10% off your Etsy order by using discount code YouTube10. See you soon.